Bible study for the past. So I'm glad to see more faces now. We are very, very blessed to have Abuna Sam. Abuna Sam actually just rode 60 kilometers today on a bike. He's just picked up cycling, so he rode to get here as well. No, we're very blessed. Abuna Sam's going to take us through a new book. We're going to read Micah. So Abuna will give us a bit of an introduction, and we'll read chapter 1 as well. So hello to everyone live on YouTube as well. Hopefully we see you in church next week. So without further ado, Abuna Sam.
In the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. It's good to be doing a physical talk again, face to face. There is literally nothing in this world worse than doing Zoom talks. You sit there talking to a blank computer, you make jokes, and all my jokes are funny, but you make a joke and no one responds, and you say, does anyone have any questions? And no one has any questions. It is the most depressing, isolating experience. So I'm glad to be face to face again. So if you have any questions, please just cut in, ask me questions. It's just a relief to see people. All right, so we'll talk about Micah. Put your hand up if you know anything about the book of Micah. Good work, team. No idea? No one? No one's got any idea? Someone has an idea, but they're just too embarrassed to put up their hand because they're trying fake humility. All right, so the book of Micah is a very interesting book. It's one of the minor prophets, and it's a very, very beautiful book, very short. So if you get a chance to read, if you want to just have a read of the Bible one day, reading the book of Micah is a good opportunity because it's only 7 chapters. And so you can read it in one sitting. Now, I'll just give a very brief overview of where we're up to at this point once we get to the book of Micah, because for most people, the Old Testament is a blur of different books, different events, and not many people have really any idea what's happening in the Old Testament. In fact, most people, when they read the Bible, will just instinctively go to the New Testament. And many people often don't ever read the Old Testament. But if you look at the history of the Old Testament, it's actually very interesting, and it can teach us a lot about humanity and about who we are. So you have the time of Genesis, which is Adam and Eve, and then you have Cain and Abel. I'm assuming you know all these stories. These are the ones you learn in Sunday school. Then you have Cain and Abel. Then you have Noah's flood. Then you have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is really the start of the story for the people of Israel. God picks one person, Abraham, and he chooses him to be the chosen people. And from his descendants to have a people that he can teach his law and teach them morality. Because up until that point, it wasn't working. You have the time of Noah, everyone does what is right in their own eyes. And people are evil. And all of humanity is evil. And so God destroys it. And he says, this time I'm going to try something different. I'm going to pick one person, I'm going to teach him my law. He's going to teach his children my law, and so on and so forth. And so this one people will be a witness to all the nations. And so we have Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And then we have the time of Moses and the Exodus. Now we come to the book of Exodus, and Jacob and his children go into Egypt and live there and become slaves under Pharaoh. And then Moses is born, and he leads them out of Egypt, across the Red Sea, and they walk around the desert of Sinai for 40 years because of their disobedience. And on Mount Sinai, that's when the law comes. On Mount Sinai, God gives to Moses the law and tells him, this is how you have to behave. And if you read the law, it's got a lot of weird things in it. So some things, maybe we don't understand them now because the context is different. So for example, they can't eat certain types of animal. And certain types of animals, when you look at it, you say, but I don't understand, what's the point of that? Maybe that particular animal was unclean at that time. Maybe it was to keep them from getting sick. They weren't allowed to eat pig or swine. Perhaps that had something to do with sickness. But in any event, the whole purpose of it, the law, was to teach them, keep yourself clean. Keep yourself pure. Keep yourself separate. And this will be relevant once we come to the book of Micah. Keep yourself separate from the nations around you. And so Moses then leads them into the promised land. Well, Moses leads them to the borders of the promised land, and Joshua leads them in. We have the Battle of Jericho, and then the period of the Judges, where the people of the people of Israel just go very good, they do very good, and then they do very bad, and they do very good, and then they do very bad, and that continues into the time of David, into the time of Solomon, into the time of Solomon's children, into the time of. So then, by the time we get to Micah, we now have two kingdoms of Israel. Because after the reign of Solomon, you have the split of the kingdom into the north, the kingdom of Israel, which the capital is... Someone please tell me. I heard someone's... Samaria. The kingdom of the north with capital is Samaria, and that's the kingdom of Israel. And the kingdom of what in the south? I heard someone say something. Judah. And what's the capital of the kingdom of Judah? Jerusalem. Zion. That's the capital. And so this sets the scene now, where you have these two kingdoms side by side, and things are going terribly. In the northern kingdom, they do not have one single good king in their entire history. Not one good king in their entire history. In the south, things are a little bit better, but not much better. They have not kept the law of God, which is to keep themselves separate. And now they're like, well, you know what? My neighbor is doing pretty well this harvest time. Let's check out their gods. The Baals, you hear a lot about Baal, or the Asherahs, or Chemosh. These are the gods of the nations surrounding them. And so the people of Israel dabbled in those gods, tried them out, did their practices, which were incredibly corrupt. And they did those things, and God sends enemies against them to destroy them. And the first enemy that comes to destroy them, and the time of Micah, is the Assyrian kingdom. The Assyrian kingdom during the time of Micah actually takes captive the whole of the north. Takes them captive all the way back to Assyria, and the 10 tribes of Israel are lost to history. If you look at the 10 tribes of Israel, you hear all these conspiracy theories and all these things online, but they're lost to history. They became assimilated because the Assyrians were smart. They would take them, they'd put them into their own capital, and then they would repopulate it. And so the people didn't have any identity anymore. Now they're these half-breeds, and that's why at the time of Jesus, you have the Samaritans, the people who lived in Samaria who were these half-breeds. They were half Jews, half not Jews, and they half worshipped God, half didn't. And you get a lot of that, you get the sense of that when you read the Samaritan woman's story, or you see the hatred that the people of the Jewish people had for the Samaritan people. And so those 10 tribes are lost forever during the time of Micah. The kingdom of Judah lasts a little bit longer, maybe another 150 years because of one or two good kings. But in the end, it's carried off by the kingdom of... No one knows, Babylon. Okay. The kingdom of Babylon. I think Liz knew, but she's too embarrassed to answer twice. Kingdom of Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar, and they go off to Babylon, and then they end up coming back. Anyway, that's getting beyond where we're at. So the time of Micah, when we read this book, he's prophesying in the time of 3 kings. One of them is called Jotham. That's the first one. He's not bad. If you read the book of Kings, it says he did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, but not with a whole heart, not with a complete heart. He was good, but not that good. Then you have his son Ahaz. He prophesied in the time of his son Ahaz too. This guy was bad news. He was evil. He would take his own children and burn them as an offering to the gods of the nations. He did all of these horrible things. He made an alliance with the kingdom of Assyria to help him, and all they did was use and abuse him. And it says that the Lord brought Israel low because Ahaz encouraged moral decline. That's what it says in the book of Kings. He encouraged moral decline. And if you read it, it says, and then Ahaz did all of these things, and it goes, this is that Ahaz. This is that one. The one that you know about that was so bad, that's the one we're talking about here. It's like this one sentence in the book of Kings says, this is that Ahaz. So he was bad news, very, very corrupt, did very, very bad things, and Micah was prophesying at this time. And then after, so what Ahaz was doing actually was he would bring in his offerings, he'd make an altar designed on foreign altars, and he would still actually offer, if you read the book of Kings, he's still actually offering the ritual offerings, the grain offerings, the wheat offerings, the burnt offerings. So he encouraged moral corruption while still maintaining some sort of guise of religiosity. And this is a lesson for all of us. How much corruption do we breed within ourselves while still portraying to the world, he's a good guy, she's a good girl, go to church, do all of these things, but how much corruption am I breeding in myself? How much do I help other people? How much do I love other people? How much do I serve other people? How much do I care about other people? I could come to church my whole life and not care one dot about anyone else. This is what Ahaz was doing. Yeah, I'm still doing the offerings, still come to church, still have Holy Communion, might even serve a Sunday school class. But how much corruption am I sowing with my bad attitude, with my, sexual impurity? All of these things, you can do all of these things under the guise of religiosity. And then we have his son, Ahaz, who is Hezekiah. Now, Hezekiah is one of the best kings in all of Israel's history. And Micah was prophesying in the time of, the good, the bad, and the in-between. And it's funny, there's this kind of theme in the Old Testament, which I don't know what the moral lesson is because I don't really understand it myself. Maybe somebody here has some ideas. There's this theme in the Old Testament of righteous parents bringing forth unrighteous kids. Isn't that the weirdest thing? I'm not saying this to teach you a lesson. I don't understand why that happens. If you read it, you'll notice it as well. You have someone like Samuel, the prophet, who has unrighteous kids. We have someone like Eli, the priest, who was righteous, whose kids were incredibly corrupt. Hezekiah was the best king. You know who his son was? Some king called Manasseh, who was one of the most depraved kings of all of Israel. Jotham was pretty good, and he gave birth to Ahaz, a very, very corrupt king. So I don't know what the lesson is in that, but I think that, maybe for me, having kids myself, you guys don't have kids, having kids, the lesson is, practically speaking, being a good parent and being a good friend or something like that is incredibly important, even beyond the spirituality of it. So you can say to someone, you can be a very holy person and have a friend, in need, and you pray for that person, but you don't give them what they need, they will not turn out well. Maybe it's the same with our kids. I'm going to be very holy, but if I don't spend time with my kids or do the things that are within my power to do, maybe that'll destroy my kids. I don't know, these are just some musings because I never really understood how very holy people could give birth to very, very unrighteous people. And that seems to be a theme in the Old Testament. So now let's just talk briefly about overview of the book of Micah itself. It's 7 chapters, and the book of Micah is a terrifying book if you're a priest. If you're a priest, you don't want to read the book of Micah. You avoid it because it condemns you. It's an attack on the rulers, the prophets, and the priests. That's the whole book of Micah. And it seems to indicate that corruption flows downward. It always seems to flow downward, corruption. If you have a bad ruler, you have bad subjects, by and large, not always. If you have bad parents, you generally have bad kids. Sometimes that doesn't happen according to God's grace and God's wisdom, but generally speaking, if you're a bad person, you will breed badness. If you have no love in your heart, you will never breed love. If you can't love in your own heart, people won't love you. If you can't serve people in your heart, people won't want to serve you. If you don't respect people, no one will respect you. Corruption breeds more and more corruption. And for me as a priest, it's very terrifying to read the book of Micah because it condemns you. It says, you rulers of the people, you're false rulers. You offer sacrifices that are false. And as a priest, you always have to be careful of that. But don't think that because you're not a priest, that you're going to escape from this condemnation. Everyone has something or is in a position of power relative to somebody else. Everyone. If you are popular, then you're in a position of power relative to someone who is unpopular. If you're smart, you're in a position of power relative to someone who is not smart. And so on and so forth. The way you then behave with your popularity or with your smartness or with your looks or with your charisma will determine whether you are condemned according to the criteria in Micah. So if you use what you have over and above somebody else in a way that is corrupt, then you are a corrupt ruler. You're a corrupt priest. And you will breed corruption and you will be the cause of all of this evil and problems in the world. So don't think that when they talk about rulers or priests, it's a specific class of people. Everyone has something in their lives which makes them above another person. And the way you behave in that relationship, in that moment, you've got money, other people don't have money, you've got whatever it is other people don't have, the way you behave with what you have determines whether you will breed corruption or whether you will breed righteousness. And the book of Micah, it alternates. So it goes from judgment to restoration, back and forth about 3 or 4 times. So God pronounces judgment and then he pronounces restoration. And this is a symbol of our lives. It's like a microcosm of our whole life. We go through alternating periods of judgment and restoration depending on our own behavior. So the book, if you look at it, sometimes the judgment can go for a chapter and then the restoration go for a chapter. Sometimes the judgment can go for a bit longer and the restoration is a bit shorter. This is our life. We are in this microcosm where whenever we live outside of God's mercy, His favor, the life of prayer, the life of service, whenever we live outside of that, we have judgment pronounced on us. And at any point in your life, you have 2 paths opened up to you. One of them is eternal judgment. Continue in the way you are going, and you'll be eternally judged. And when God says, it's funny because when we read the Old Testament, He says, "And I will never have mercy on you, and I will cause you to be cut off forever." Big terms, big words. And I always read that thinking a bit confused because I was like, but they're not cut off forever. God never cuts off anyone forever. So why does He say, "I will cut you off forever"? Because that is the option that you have in front of you. If you continue to reject God, you will be cut off forever. And it will never end. But if you at any point in your life choose the other path of restoration, of repentance, of mercy, then all of the promises, and we'll read a few of them, all of the promises of the book of Micah come upon you. No matter what position you are in your life, if you are the worst person in the world, you don't have to be eternally judged. You have, at that point in your life, the promise of restoration. And that's what the book of Micah teaches us. I'll just read some of the beautiful, hopeful promises of the book of Micah. You know, when people read the Old Testament, they're like, man, it's full of judgment and horror and violence and hatred. They haven't read the Old Testament. There is a lot of that in the Old Testament in some parts, but 90% of the Old Testament is mercy. It's God saying to the people of Israel, I'm going to destroy you because you are corrupt, because you're not merciful, because you're not loving, because you oppress the poor and the widow and the stranger. And so I'm going to destroy you for that. So actually God is a loving God. He's caring for people, and he's angry with the rulers and the leaders for doing the opposite of what he wants them to do. But if you read the Old Testament, so it's a hopeful message. For people that are oppressed and poor and suffering, it's a hopeful message. The Old Testament is full of hope. For people who are proud and rich and don't care about God, it's a terrifying message, but so is the New Testament. The New Testament is more terrifying. God says to the Pharisees, woe to you. You're like whitewashed tombs. So there's not a difference between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. It's the same God, and he cares about the same things: mercy, justice, compassion, service, and love. That's what he cares about. He's just addressing it in slightly different ways. So if you read, for example, the Micah chapter 2, verse 12, it says, I will surely assemble all of you, Jacob. I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together like a sheep of the fold, like a flock in the midst of their pasture. And if you read another one in chapter 4, in that day, says the Lord, I will assemble the lame, I will gather the outcast and those who have been afflicted. And if you look in chapter 7, I think it is, or chapter, I'm not sure which one it is, that's the prophecy. It says, out of you, Bethlehem, Judah, shall come forth a ruler. And that's the prophecy of Jesus. And the most beautiful thing is, if you look at the last chapter, it is filled with hope throughout the whole thing. It says, from verse 7, it says, I will look to the Lord, I will wait for the God of my salvation. My God will hear me. Do not rejoice over me, my enemy. When I fall, I will arise. When I sit in darkness, the Lord will be a light to me. This is a very, very beautiful, hopeful message that we have in this book. If you're ever feeling like you are the outcast of society, like you are unpopular, like you are unloved, like all of us feel at different times in our lives, the book of Micah is incredibly comforting and reassuring. Open it up and receive comfort from the Bible. Receive comfort from this book. And in chapter 6, this is just by way of an overview. I'm not going to spend long on chapter 1, so don't panic, because there's not that much in it. But I just thought I'd just give an overview of the whole book, and then I'll spend just a little bit on chapter 1. So in chapter 6, God, it's like a courtroom. God brings forth and he says, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? And God says, plead your case. What have I done to you for you to behave like this? Like, for you to behave this corruptly, surely I must have done something to you. And when I read this, I thought, I wonder what I would say if God said that to me. And my answer would vary depending on my circumstances in life, don't you think? So if God says, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? Some of us may have a response. Don't you think? Some of us may say, well, God, you gave me terrible parents. You gave me terrible life. You gave me this sin or this sickness that I can't get rid of. So I was curious. I'm like, how can God say this? But there are people who could respond, maybe like Job, and say, well, actually, now that you bring it up, there's a few things that I'd like to discuss with you. And the more you see this, the more you see people in really, really horrible circumstances in life. Some people have life terribly. Now, for 90% of us, I believe that in all honesty, we have no answer to God. What he's given you is far more than what you lack, especially here in this country. What you have is infinitely more than what you lack. Some of you may say, I have this personality where I can't get along, or I'm not good at making friends, or I'm this, or I'm that. That's fine, but you have your health, you have shelter, you have, whatever. Anyone can come up with something in their life that can justify, that overweighs the good, the bad. But some people may have a legitimate claim, and you see them in your life, people who have suffering beyond description. And I think that in this case, they still don't have a claim. They still can't answer God. Why? Because the reason why people leave the church, and it happens all the time, I see it all the time, they're like, I'm like, God's laughing stock. I'm like he's a joke. My life is so miserable. I'm this, I'm that. Why is he doing this to me? I can't accept him. The reason why people come to that conclusion, and the only answer that anyone could give to that person, is that what you're hopeful for in this life is a shadow. This life is just a drop in the ocean of all eternity, and it's only when you take salvation in its entirety, when you say, I'm thinking of my eternal salvation in heaven, that I can make sense of the horrible things in my life. Even if they're not that horrible, even if the good is better than the bad, if you do not believe in salvation, if you do not believe in eternity, then you will always be depressed about your life. Then you will always be angry at God. So why, God, did you do this to me? But when you think about the suffering of this life as a drop in the ocean of a sea of bliss, only then can we not have a response to God when he says, what have I done to you? How have I wearied you? And it's because he offers us this on the cross. It's because he offers you this eternal bliss, this eternal salvation, starting from here, from today, that no one has an answer to him. We may respond, but it's not legitimate. We may say, but I've got this suffering and all of these things, and he'll say, I had it worse. What you have, I had it worse. I had someone say to me one time, they said, I said, but God, died on the cross, like he was saying, I'm suffering, I'm going through this. I said, but Christ died on the cross. He said, yeah, but that was only one day. It was only on Good Friday. I said to him, I think you're missing something here. I think you're missing that he is the eternal God. And he chose to live within the limits of humanity. That he is the eternal God and he suffered more than we ever suffer being God. And when you put it in that context, that God has given you all of this, then never can I say to myself, or never can I say to God, this is unfair. It may be unfair, like vis-a-vis me and the person next to me. If I look to them, but you don't know what that person's going through, but let's say you did, it may be unfair. I can look at that person and say, he's got it so much better than me. He had it so much easier than me. So if you look at it that way, it may be unfair. But when you look at it in the context of eternal salvation, it is never unfair. Because what you have offered to you, especially when you are downtrodden and beat up in life, what you have offered to you is even better than what they have, because you recognize it, because you recognize your need. So when God says, when God presents us in this courtroom and puts us and says, how have I wearied you? What do you have against me? Maybe we can respond with our own complaints, but it is never really justified. And when you think you are justified, it's only because you're not seeing the big picture. You haven't seen what awaits you if only you lay hold of it. And really, the promise of future bliss is actually amazing. And it's funny, if you read Micah 4, it's really nice. It says, it will come to in those times, many nations will come and they will put away, they beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. So there's no more fighting. Now we are gardening. We are cultivating together. And that's the promise of the future bliss. And the Micah 4 is word for word the same as Isaiah 2. So the question is, who said it? Did Isaiah say it or did Micah say it? Actually, they were contemporaries. They lived at the same time. So who said it? I don't know. People who take the Bible and they say everything in the Bible has to be 100% literal, this and that. What would you say to that? Who wrote it? Did they both come up with word for word exactly the same thing? Obviously, there was another source and they both came up with it, or one of them took it from the other one. I don't know. But it's a beautiful promise of the wars you see all around you now, because the people of Israel were suffering in wars all around. The wars you see all around you now will end. Now, I'll just go into chapter 1. How much, am I short on time? Are you sure? They're saying keep going. I was like, no, I'm going to tell him to hurry up. Okay, I'll just read very quickly. I'll just go through very quickly. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. Basically, it's the first chapter is judgment pronounced on Samaria, the kingdom of the north, and Jerusalem, the kingdom of the south. And it says you're both going to be destroyed. And I'll just read verse 6. It says, I'll read from verse 5. All this for the transgression of Jacob and for the sin of the house. If we could just open up, that'd be great. And for the sins of the house of Israel. What is the transgression of Jacob? Is it not Samaria? What are the high places of Judah? Are they not Jerusalem? Therefore I will make Samaria a heap of ruins in the field, places for planting a vineyard. I will pour down her stones into the valley, and I will uncover her foundations. This is a very interesting thing. I'll uncover her foundation. What are the foundations of Samaria? Well, to give you a bit of a history lesson, I'm probably the only person here that likes history, but I'll give you a bit of a history lesson. Samaria was started by, when Solomon's son ruled, the kingdom was split. Solomon's son Rehoboam took the south, and Jeroboam rebelled and took the north, and the 10 tribes. And when he got there, he had a bright idea. He said, listen, if the people in my kingdom have to go worship, so they go worship in Jerusalem, in the temple in Jerusalem. When they go there, their hearts will be drawn to the people in the south, and they will forsake the kingdom of the north and make the north weak. So what he did, he had a brilliant idea. He built 2 calves, and he put them up, and he said, here you are, Israel, these are the gods that got you out of Egypt. And said, worship here. And for the next 500 years, that foundation was what destroyed the people of Israel, the kingdom of the north. And no king could break out of that foundation. You couldn't destroy it. It was there for too many years now. It's established. It's like entrenched. And even if a king wants to be good, he can't go there. He can't destroy that. And this is the foundation of the kingdom of Israel. And it destroyed any hope that they had going forward of being righteous. Because their gods that brought them out of Egypt were 2 calves. And that was the foundation of the kingdom of Israel. The question then is, what is my foundation? And we always have to be very careful, because my foundation can be something that is very bad, and I can build and build and build and build on it and not realize until it's too late just how much I have to destroy. And this is why when you say to God, give me humility, it is a very scary request, because I have built my foundation on pride. For him to destroy it will hurt me. For him to destroy it will be painful. For him to destroy my pride, he has to humiliate me, because I've built a foundation of pride. My whole life, I want to be the best. My whole life, I don't have mercy on people. My whole life, I think of myself as something that I'm not. To undo all of that after 20 years, 30 years, is so difficult. When you reach someone, an older Egyptian man normally, and you tell them, forgive, but not even, plenty of women are like that too. Everyone, when you tell them, forgive this person, can't forgive that one. Never. 30 years, you still haven't forgiven them? Never. Why? Because I've built this foundation of pride, and it's like a wall around me that no one can break it down. God says, I will uncover her, I'll show you. So we have to ask God to uncover my foundations early. Because my foundations could be pride, could be selfishness. I could always live for myself, always want the best for myself, always care about my own comfort at the expense of other people. If that's my foundation for 20, 30 years, how hard is it going to be to undo it? When you're young, this is the time. Undo the damage that you've done so far. We've all done damage. Undo the damage now. Go to God and let him uncover your foundations. Let him do surgery on you, open you up, reveal the evil, the pride, the malice, all of the things inside me, and heal it. It's painful. If you ask God to give you any virtue, it will be painful. If you want patience, you have to suffer and be patient in tribulation. If you want humility, you have to be humiliated. Do you know what I mean? So do it from now before the foundations become entrenched over generations and generations and years and years. Verse 7. All her carved images shall be beaten to pieces, and all her pay as a harlot shall be burned with the fire. All her idols I will lay desolate, for she gathered it from the pay of a harlot, and they shall return to the pay of a harlot. This is a common theme, once again, in the Old Testament, harlotry. God is always talking about Israel and Judah as harlots. And one time he even says, you know what, you're not even a harlot. Because a harlot takes money for her services. But you pay money for people to come and use and abuse you. And this is something we need to think and reflect on ourselves. How often do I sell myself to gain an idol? How often do I sell myself out to gain something like this? Our sexuality, how often do we sell it out cheaply? And what do we get for it? Nothing. But you give it out cheaply in a way that devalues it. What for? And this is what they did their whole lives. They give it out cheaply. Your sexuality is a prize. Your purity is a prize. And to give it out cheaply is such a shame. But not only that, we sell our integrity to make money. Honesty, we find an opportunity, and you'll see this as you get older. It is one of the big problems that you have when you're older. To make money, you take shortcuts. To make money, you rip someone off here or there. How often do I sell myself out, my honor, my integrity, my honesty, to something so pathetic and small like money? And second last. Let me see if I'll skip that one. I'll just read verse 9. It says, "For her wounds are incurable, for it has come to Judah, it has come to the gate of my people, to Jerusalem." The only point I wanted to make about that was, remember how I said corruption flows downward? It also flows sideways. So Samaria was so corrupt that people of Judah would go there and go, "Oh, this is interesting. I like this way you worship your gods," and they will take on their practices. And this is why God told them, many people go, "Oh, but God told them to kill everyone in the Old Testament, so it can't be right God." But the purpose of that whole message was destroy every man, woman, and child in this place, because anything you leave will corrupt you. If you leave the women here, they will remember, and you will marry them and they will corrupt you. If you leave a man, he will teach you. He will marry your wives and lead them to corruption, or marry your daughters and lead them to corruption. So cut yourself off completely. Do not touch anyone or anything that is unclean, and cut yourself. So he was teaching them, these are the principles. And yes, now the principles are different. No, the principles are the same. The enactment is different. The principle is the same. Cut yourself off from anything that would corrupt you, including other people. There are many people who have been led astray by the false pretense of service. I'm going to serve this person. It just so happens she's incredibly attractive, but I'm going to serve her. I really think she needs my help. Many people have been led astray with this concept of, I'm going to help this person. Anyone who's addicted to drugs, sometimes someone who's addicted to drugs comes say to me, "Oh, I want to help this person." I said, "Don't go near them. It's not your job to help that person. You go near that person, you're going to end up on drugs." "No, but I want to help them. I want to teach them my experience." Don't even think about it. You keep yourself pure from everyone and everything that takes away from your salvation. Your salvation is the most important thing in the world. And if there is something in your life that is taking you away from your salvation, a relationship, a friend, even if you're helping that person, cut them off. Nothing is worth your salvation. Or at least seek guidance about what the best way to do it is. And the last verse in it, it says, make yourself bold and cut off your hair because of your precious children. Enlarge your boldness like an eagle, for they shall go from you into captivity. And this is another one, and there's so many motifs in the Old Testament. Another one is captivity. Because the people of Israel and the people of Judah were led into captivity, this is one big theme. And our whole life, like I said, often is a microcosm of the whole Old Testament. We often find ourselves in captivity. But there is a promise for those who are in captivity. The people who are in a sin that they can't get out of, in a difficult situation that they can't get out of, there is a promise. And that is the promise that comes in the later chapter where it says, I will turn the no more swords but a plowshare, no more spears but a pruning hook. So if you're in captivity, the time has come for there to be no more swords, no more spears. Stop fighting. If you're in a sin, stop fighting the sin. It's not going to help you. You keep fighting, and more wars, more struggles, more battle. Stop fighting the sin. Turn your sword into a plowshare. Turn your spear into a pruning hook. What does that mean? It means that the time has come to stop fighting the sin and to start cultivating. Forget fighting the sin. It's not going to help you. You've fought it 1,000,000 times and you've lost 1,000,000 times. The time has come to start cultivating, to start planting, start watering, start nurturing. And what is it that we are nurturing and planting and watering? It's the relationship with God. This is what we're called to do. This is the promise of God. The sin means nothing. The relationship with God is everything. Cultivate that. Put away the sword. Stop fighting. Stop being angry. Stop getting angry and disappointed with yourself. Stop, trying with sheer willpower to not do a certain sin or be a certain way. The only job that you have is to cultivate your relationship with God. He will fight the battle for you. He will defeat the sin for you in a time and in a place when He is ready. But the battle for you is not to fight against sin, it's to fight for your relationship with God. And that's what the promise is for God in the future when people will no longer fight in this way. That's about all I have to say. Were there any questions? Oh, classic. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When what feels like the rejection comes through the church, yeah. So the church, say when you talk about the church, we're talking about different things. The people in the church is different to the church. The individuals in the church is different to the church. So the comfort of God comes through the church, yes, and it can come in many ways, in many times through the people in the church. So people bring you comfort. The community that you have in the church is bringing you comfort, is bringing you peace, is bringing you joy. And that's a perfect community within the church. Sometimes that doesn't happen. And I'm fortunate to say, growing up at St. Mark's, I'm taking a dig at myself. Unfortunate to say, sometimes that doesn't happen at St. Mark's. With the youth so insulated, sometimes we create this, barrier that makes it worse. It aggravates people's isolations because when they come, they can't break into this beautiful community, but they can't break in. And so some people feel a bit ostracized in that way. So the individuals in the church are different to the church itself. And that's a difficult thing because many people who've left the church have left the church because of people within the church, often priests, often higher ups. I know people that have come to church one time, somebody said something to them they didn't like, and they never came back. And so we have to be careful that we as a community are not the cause of people leaving the church. We as a community are not cutting people off, and not only from the church but from God, because like Danny said, they associate God with the individuals in the church, which is not the right thing to do, to associate God with individuals in the church. But if that's you and you come to church and you find that you're isolated from church and all of these ways, there's many different ways to do it. If you're committed to be a good Christian and if you're willing to persevere, then what you need to do is involve yourself in the church more via service. Many people come to church and they're isolated because they're not social, or they can't speak very easily to people, or they feel awkward like me. In big crowds, you get a bit awkward. What you need to do is serve. Give yourself an excuse. Give yourself a reason to be doing something. That's one way to do it. Another way, I think, is if that's you, is to remember that what you're coming to get from God is His Holy Communion, His body and His blood, and you can experience the fullness of the church within your own bedroom, in your own life, in your own service, and you can create a church all around you through the people that you serve in your own personal lives. Does that answer your question, Danny? I don't know.
What if you're at church and you build relationships with people in church, and those people start to drift away? Do you cut off those relationships?
Oh, no, definitely not. I mean, unless they're making you drift away. What I was saying before was sort of more in relation to like people who are taking you away from the church. But if you're serving someone, of course you don't cut them off. If there's no danger of your salvation, then you continue to serve those people. And really our whole aim in life should be thinking about people who are not in the church. The people who are in the church, they're good. We always got to check in on them, they're good. But your whole aim in life should be the people who are outside of the church. It doesn't mean you go with them to the clubs and, smoke shisha with them and do drugs with them to try and bring them back. That's ridiculous. But you always, keep them in mind. You always try and serve them by being a friend, being with them in environments that are healthy, that don't taint you. Does that make sense? Well, if it depends. If I'm going as an individual to serve a group, that's a red flag, because I'll be corrupted by the group. If I'm going as a group to serve an individual, there's no chance of being corrupted. You're going with you and Meza going to serve someone, you're not going to end up in a nightclub, you know what I mean? You're going to be okay. You're going to bring that person to a place that is good for you, that you guys are comfortable in. That's one way of thinking about it. You should never be in a place where you are outnumbered, where you are liable to be influenced. And if you ever find yourself doing things or behaving in a way contrary to the highest standard of Christianity, then there's a problem. If you find yourself swearing, in their presence, something is going on. If you find yourself doing things, that you wouldn't ordinarily do in their presence, you're already on that path and you need to cut it off. Keep in mind what is the highest level of Christian morality, in terms of, when you're in this group, all of a sudden you're gossiping. That's not the highest level of Christian morality. Something is wrong. Whenever I go there, I become like them, they're not becoming like me. When you serve people, you do not become like them. That is a big mistake. We serve people by going to their level in terms of meeting them where they are, but you do not become like them. You don't serve somebody who smokes by smoking. Yeah, we can relate, like he smokes, I smoke, that I'll bring him back to the church. Never. People will come to the church when they look and they see something that they don't have. When they look at you and say, this is a good guy. He's honest. He's got integrity. And he won't change his values for nothing or no one. They want that. But if you go there and you change your values to become like them, what are you offering them? Nothing. They do the same thing. So that's the goal. If you find your values, your behavior, your morality, or anything is changing, you never ever go to that level. You are there as an example to meet them on their level. No judgment, no criticism, nothing like that, but to be an example of what a Christian life looks like. Make sense? Any other questions? Glory be to God.
We thank Abuna very much. Abuna is going to join us next week as well to talk about Micah 2 and 3. We'll stand up for prayer, Abuna, please.
And the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Dear Lord, thank you for bringing us here today again and to be back at church, dear Lord, in your house. Thank you, Lord, for giving us Abuna Sam to take us through Micah and to teach us, dear Lord, how to be firm with our beliefs and to remove the foundations that might be bringing us down. Please, dear Lord, look after us this week and look after those that didn't come this week. Guide us all, dear Lord, and help us to build a close relationship with you. Amen.
Hear us, O Lord, as we pray thankfully together, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord, for thine is the kingdom, power, and the glory forever and ever. Amen. There's going to be a prayer meeting in about 10 minutes or so. I think Kira will get the slides up. And God willing, if the restrictions remain the same, hopefully we can continue this next week. So keep an eye out for the announcements and wait to hear this legend again next week. Thanks, guys.
Where are you now, when darkness seems to win? Where are you now, when the world is crumbling? Oh, I hear you say, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. Hey. Oh, where are you now, when all I feel is doubt? Oh, where are you now, when I can't figure it out? Oh, I hear you say, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. Hey. You're not threatened by the war, you're not shaken by the storm. I know you're in control, even in our suffering, even when it can't be seen. I know you're in control. Oh, I hear you say, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. Hey, look up, child. By the warrior, not shaken by the storm. Child, you're in control. Look up, child. I'm suffering, even when you can't listen. Child, you're in control. Look up, child. every scene. I know you're in control. Look up,